to another episode of the Cup Interviews. My name is Jillian Robinson. I am your associate producer with Cup of Hemlock Theatre, and today I have an extraordinary artist, PhD candidate, friend, amazing person, Patrick Teed, joining us for our conversation today. How are you doing, Patrick?
I'm great. I'm really great. How are you, Jill?
I'm doing so well. We're so lucky to have you. Yes, it's a beautiful day outside. It also has been a long time since we've chatted, so I'm excited to dive right in.
I just got back from Spain.
I know, my goodness, it looked gorgeous. Well, apropos, you're taking a sip from your cup. Tell us, what are you sipping with us today, Patrick?
Coffee, always black. I will be having much more of this throughout the day.
Nice. I also have black coffee, but mine is flavored. Mine's coconut macaroon flavored coffee.
Oh, fancy. Yeah. I guess technically I'm drinking an Americano. I just think of that as coffee.
Right.
Because I drink it so often. But yes. Technically I got the black Americano.
Love it. I'm also drinking out of a Les Mis cup because, fun fact, Patrick and I have done a musical together, so I figured I would be musical with my cup today. I'm also wearing owl earrings because, to quote our dear friend and colleague Clara Martin, Patrick is the smartest person I know. So, commemorating Patrick with my owl earrings.
Oh, I have an Ottawa cup because no particular reason. It just holds a lot of coffee.
Nice. Okay. So let's tell us about yourself. How did you get into theater? Let's dive right in.
Yeah. So I actually guess I got into theater maybe, I actually don't know what a standard timeline would be, but I'm going to say a little late. So I started in music, and my parents put me in music when I was really young. I started piano lessons at 4, vocal lessons at I think 6. I got involved in the Hamilton Children's Choir as a kid, which is a pretty cool, really cool choir actually that travels internationally. And then the director of the Hamilton Children's Choir got me linked to opera actually as a child. So I started performing in opera when I was I think 8. And I traveled a bit for that. And that was incredible, and I loved that so much. But I always found opera, even as a kid, I would, especially as a kid, maybe I brought so much energy to the stage and the things I wanted to do. And I was always kind of redirected to retain composure, because opera's changing now, but still, even at the time, 10 years ago, it was so much just about, not 10 years ago, this is I'm much older than I think in my head, 15 years ago, but it's so much just about vocal production, right? And anything that inhibited the capacity to make a refined sound was just no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. And so I found that really constraining. And so by the time I got to high school, my music teacher was you should get into music theater. You have a really well-trained voice. You clearly have a lot of theatrical energy and a lot of musical skill in general. So do the high school musical and see how you like it. So that was Footloose. So I was running Footloose.
Nice.
For my first show. And then I loved it immediately. I was okay, this is incredible. And then my music teacher, she was super cool. She was very connected to the local theater scene, including Theatre Aquarius, which is Hamilton's regional theater. So she immediately was okay, there's a production of High School Musical happening. Here's the auditions. Let's sign you up. And so I did that professional production of High School Musical as my second production. And from there, I was just okay, this is it. I have to keep doing this. It's such a cool way to exercise a bunch of different artistic, kind of genres, right? And I loved it. And then ever since haven't been able to leave it.
That's awesome. And you said you did High School Musical with Theatre Aquarius.
Yes.
Who were you in that? I'm just curious.
So in that, I was just a basketball player. I was 15 at this point, and all of the leads were from Sheridan, and then they basically were just filling the ensemble with actual high school age. people.
And you're originally from Hamilton? Is that
Yeah.
correct? Okay, cool.
Yeah,
So that's
technically
kind of
it's a
cool.
small town outside of Hamilton, but then after amalgamation happened, it became Hamilton. But I'm actually from Millgrove. Shout out to people in the Hamilton area. It's by the dinosaurs on Highway 6.
Okay, yes. You have heard it here. Okay, so that's how you sort of blossomed into the theater realm, and we're so glad that that's where we're having you here today, and that's kind of came here from there. But also, you are a PhD candidate.
Yeah.
So tell us about that. What are you getting your PhD in? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm doing my PhD in social and political thought. Yeah. So I guess to narrate the history of that. So I remember when I was choosing schools to go to, I had applied for and got into some theater schools, but I also applied for and got into like essentially political science programs. And I was really kind of trying to pick this. I could see myself going in two paths, and one was like really trying to make the theater thing work, and the other one was, okay, I don't want to live a precarious artist life. I'm gonna go to law school. And so, my 18-year-old brain was decided like no to precarity, law school. And so I went to U Ottawa for my undergrad, which is my Ottawa mug.
Nice.
And then at U Ottawa, I realized two things, which was that I actually couldn't leave theater behind in the way I thought I could. So I immediately got by second year, I was like, okay, no, I'm getting back into the theater scene. And I got really involved in the regional theater scene in Ottawa. And then I also realized that I have no interest in being a lawyer. But I am actually really passionate about like ideas, and I really loved school. And so I was like growing increasingly, I was developing another passion, which was, just for like reading theory and doing, and thinking about things politically, conceptually. And so, which funny enough is another very precarious life. So then when I was kind of figuring out what I wanted to do after my undergrad, and I was like, okay, I really actually do want to make theater work. And I also actually want to make just being able to read work. And I was like, I think these things work well together in a certain way, because I mean, with academic work, like I can pick up a book and read, and that's very like flexible. Like the time of it is very flexible. And theater, obviously, you're going contract to contract. Ideally, it's not so flexible. Ideally, you're like, you're one follows the other, but it inevitably becomes kind of flexible. So I was like, I think I'm going to pursue graduate school as like a job to fill in this space of when theater is not happening. So that's kind of how I arrived at grad school. But in grad school, I've obviously grown increasingly passionate also about just that work, and more thinking about how these two things really go together. So my work in grad school is on kind of the interrelationship between settler colonialism and anti-Blackness, and I think a lot about histories of like the emergence of the state, the Canadian state specifically, but the state more broadly, and kind of the violence central to that emergence and maintenance. And which people might be like, that has nothing to do with theater. But first, I think it's inspired in me a real passion for like a particular genre of theater, which is like political theater. Like I know exactly the kind of questions I want to ask with the theater I do. I know exactly the things I want to push against. And then also I've just really increasingly learned the value of like research skills for acting and obviously like writing shows and producing and directing, but also just acting. Like I will never forget, I was in Dogfight. I don't know time anymore with the pandemic. I think 4 years ago. And I was Eddie Birdlace, and I was like, this man is reprehensible. Like, I don't know how to enter into this character because he's a really bad person, and you can't enter into a character in that way because you're going to give a really flat performance, right? And so I was like, so I just read like a shit ton about like military cultures of the 1960s, like who were these men? Why did they make the choices they do? Why were they able to dehumanize people to the extent that they did? So that I could actually like flesh out this kind of person in a way that, really allowed me to move through him and not just be like, oh, he's bad, while still knowing like, oh, he's making bad choices, but actually really being able to understand what's going on here. So yeah, I love the two together, like academia and theater. I think if a person can make them work together, I really do recommend it.
Same. I totally agree with you too, and I like to approach the work like you're saying too. Like if I can research it, if I can sort of pack the theory behind the practicality of what I'm doing on stage, it aligns brain and body and soul a lot healthier and a lot better for performance and as performer. So I love that, and I think totally what you're doing in grad school, and like you're saying, how that sort of sparks sort of political ideas to put on stage, and a lot of what you're studying right now, like I think should be on stage, and it's sort of, we can all benefit from approaching material from a very critical and analytical point of view, and kind of going back to taking works or taking ideals from our past and putting them on stage today, and sort of rethinking or relearning, unlearning. So totally. Now, I have to ask, when you are, like you said, in a show like Dogfight, or when you are practically the actor, is there like, what's the struggle between balancing sort of, I have to write this essay due, tomorrow, but then I also have to be on stage as a leading or supporting role? Like, what's that like, balancing that?
Yeah, it can be a lot at times. So luckily, I found that, the deeper I've gotten into academia, I've learned that like all academics are just like the worst procrastinators. So whenever I really find myself in like a moment of crisis where I'm like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to meet this deadline, I'm just like, you know what? I'm just going to actually be honest about it, because you always find out that every other professor is just as, if not more, behind. Also, shout out to anyone doing their undergrad that's like stressed about due dates. Know that your professor does not. They don't keep up with their own due dates. So, but I also find my brain really does. I think it can be really annoying when people say this kind of thing, but my brain really does work really well under stress. Like, I don't think that's a healthy way to move through, like completing things. But like, in my undergrad, I was very much the person that was like, night of, I'm finishing that essay, like down to the wire, like, yeah, like, oh, I have 2 hours. But it really, I don't know, it actually just focuses my brain. Like actually just yesterday, I presented at the American Studies Association a paper that I literally wrote the day before. It was not fun writing that paper the day before, but yeah, I find I can do a lot under those constraints. And so when I'm balancing, so first I'd say I really try to make sure, like, if I'm about to take like a contract that will take up a bunch of my time, I'll try to make sure, like, okay, I'm not going to plan a conference around this time, or I'm not going to submit something that will inevitably need revisions. But of course, things end up getting messy always, and things do overlap. So I just like really ride the stress. I'll probably, like, it will probably take some years off my life, but like, I enjoy wearing both hats. So
yeah, no, I agree. And as someone, like, I'm very much like I said, I like to sort of dabble in both the theory and the practical side. I all throughout high school, I was very much, I did the sciences as my courses, but then I was a part of community theater outside of school time, and I do find like the two balance, because I think we're similar in this way, like having that balance, there's almost like you have sort of like escape avenues at your disposal, where if one's getting stressful, you can dive into the other, and vice versa. And because and you're still learning, or you're still progressing in both, but
I was gonna say that too, where how there's also something really nice about. There's something really nice about finding ways that things can overlap. And then there's also something really nice about finding the ways that you can hold them distinct. Because like you say, it's like, oh, I'm really stressed with like whatever, these 3 auditions. I'm actually just going to take a break to like read a text that I wanted to read for a long time. Breathe and do this other thing. We'll still feel productive, but like in a different kind of way. Yeah, and it can help. Yeah, sorry.
And no, it's okay. I find on that note too, like, they seem such different fields, but then when you do have sort of one of them halted and you're forced to kind of dive into another one, you are using skill sets that the other one usually gives you, right? Because you're trying to fill that side that's not actively being massaged.
Always.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I presented at a conference in May, and it's gonna sound like ongoing right now as conferences, but it's because theater's closed. But actually, someone commented, and they were like, "Really, like, kind of performed your piece. It was really captivating." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm actually a trained actor. Yeah, I really like. Yeah, I think that is also central to how I speak and stuff. But yeah, absolutely. Like, it's so interesting though. Like, it's not like that's something I intentionally do. It's just like how I arrive at presentation. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And just to double back, I'm totally with you. I'm like, I do my best writing from like 11 p.m. to 4 in the morning, which like is very not quote unquote healthy. I mean, I always have the thing of like, you can catch up on sleep. Yeah. Like, as long as you're catching up on sleep, then, you know, like, pack whatever you need to pack in on and just breathe and know that you're going to catch up on sleep.
Yeah. No, I feel similarly. I'm not one of those. I wish I could be one of those. I'll sleep when I'm dead people, but I'm not. I do know that I need sleep. But I am also like, but I just need to make sure I factor it in whenever. Like, I can go one night and it'll be a hard night, and then that just means the next day I go to bed early. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I'm very like that too. Like,
again, finding the balance.
Yeah.
Yes. Love it. Okay, so I'm gonna tip our scale a little bit and sort of go into more theater chat. So recently, you just were a part of Hamilton Fringe, which again, I forgot you were from Hamilton. So that's super awesome that during the pandemic you were able to be a part of your hometown, well, close to hometown Fringe. So you actually co-wrote and performed in the show It's a Beautiful Day for Brunch and to Arrest the Cops That Killed Breonna Taylor. So what is that show about? Tell us about that, and what was your experience being on that project as both writer and performer?
Yeah, I feel like there's so many ways to enter into this. So first, I feel like I just want to say, like, so did that show with my best friend Carly Billings, who actually we met in that High School Musical production. That was my second theater production I ever did. And just as a funny small anecdote, it was like literally the very first day of staging, and it was like this very small thing. The director just was like, "Okay, you, like me and Carly, you're just gonna start the show by walking across the stage with your books or whatever." And then as he's walking a bunch of other things, Carly and I just inevitably start talking, and we just kind of immediately hit it off and joked like, "Oh, we're gonna be best friends forever." And it's actually proved true. So from that first day of High School Musical to this show, so that was who I was doing this with, was Carly. And so the idea for the show came while I was, scrolling through Instagram. And obviously, last year, after the summary execution of George Floyd, followed by the summary execution of Regis Korchinski-Paquette, there were like a lot of quote unquote conversations about anti-Blackness and police violence that already I was like kind of tracing and following, and was really quite disturbed by how those conversations were unfolding, and the kind of impetuses behind them, the way people were talking about things without actually really attending to the problem, or the way the problems would be transformed and repurposed to be completely different things. Like, something I was so disturbed by was the trend to be like, we need more diverse police officers. And I was like, literally the conversation is about reducing policing. How is this becoming a conversation about expanding policing? Or, oh, we need like cameras for police officers. Again, I'm like, how is this becoming a conversation about expanding policing? So already I was like, this is kind of fucked, actually, the way people are approaching this. And then I was really struck by, especially how social media was playing into this, and the way it seemed like people felt almost compelled to post things, even when they had nothing to say, or when they were actually saying very anti-Black things, even when they thought they were being allies. And so I was passing through posts and I saw a photo of like a person I actually know. And she posted a photo of herself at brunch, just like smiling, holding a mimosa. And the caption was literally, "It's a beautiful day for brunch and to arrest the cops that killed Breonna Taylor." And I was like, what the actual fuck? Like, and then of course all of the comments were like, "You look fire, girl," or people being like, "Oh, great message and hot pick." And I was like, this is so disturbing. Like, it's actually disturbing.
Yeah.
And I was talking to a couple colleagues and friends in grad school. And we were just talking in general about like how we'd all seen these kinds of posts. And then my one friend and colleague, Bahar, she showed me a friend of hers who is actually an actor in New York, who posted like the cringiest post where it was like her face against like a mirror and she looked very sad. And it, like the first line was "Silence is deadly," and then it was like 4 lines. And then Bahar was like, "Oh, Patrick, you should do a dramatic reading of this." And so I did this like dramatic reading. And I was like, and like everyone was laughing. And I joked, like, there's a show here. Like, there's a show in these like absurd posts that people are making, which are already so performative. But then that was kind of like the end of it. It was just like this joke on a picnic with a bunch of friends and colleagues. And then like jump a couple months later and Carly and I are having a conversation about what do we want to do for Fringe Festival. Because we wanted to do something because we're like the pandemic is happening. And I was reminded of that conversation I had at the park like a couple months prior. And I was like, oh my God, Carly, like we've talked about this phenomenon. Like, what if we did something like this? And we could actually make it like verbatim text. We could do just what people are actually saying in order to help point out how these things are fucked. And so people can hopefully do better. And Carly immediately was like, absolutely. Carly even was like, I'm still seeing posts like this, and was like, there's this one, there's this one, there's this one. And so we both just were like, okay, this is definitely what we want to do. And it seems like because Fringe was, I think it ended up being entirely virtual, but at least mostly virtual. It seemed like such a like meaningful way to enter into a virtual piece as well, because the thing we were critiquing was really so much about the virtual social media like circulation of all of these things.
Right.
So we were like, we feel like it speaks to the specificity of digital theater. It speaks to, obviously, like verbatim theater is cool in its own way when you're grabbing words people are actually saying. And it, for both of us, was like, and it's like necessary. Like, people need to actually reckon with how we were culturally able to transform the summary executions of multiple Black people into like a feel-good social media boosting project. And then broadly a political project about like expanding policing, right? Because we have literally seen the Toronto police budget has only increased, like macroscopically police budgets across Canada and the United States have only increased. So it's like, we need to find ways to intervene into this. So that was kind of the origin story for the piece.
Great. And I remember I was able to tune in to watch it. Are folks able to find access to the show? Like what?
Yeah. So great question. I was possibly gonna like boost this at the end, but we're currently finding. So it was obviously up for the Fringe. It was up for like 3 weeks, I think. And then when Fringe ended, it was taken down. But like one of the things we're doing right now is finding actually a permanent home for it. Great. So so we're thinking. We're still figuring out all of these. I'm not very tech literate, so when I say we, it's really Carly right now. But Carly is really figuring out a lot of the tech details of like how to kind of permanently house it on Vimeo or something like that, so that folks can access it if they're interested. So the answer is yes. We're figuring it out.
I would like to watch it again and multiple times too, because like I remember actually you and I chatted about it after I had seen it. because you're so right. Like, it was so fascinating how the only medium or media that was at your fingertips was sort of like a Zoom-esque space, and how that married impeccably to the content that exists as the piece, like, and the layers in that, and then like sound and videography. Like, there's so much to sort of peel back and explore and discuss and write about. Even I remember we had a pretty lengthy conversation, and just everything was thoughts were going off, and it certainly sparks conversation. And I'm glad to hear that it's going to have a permanent home, because more folks should definitely be seeing the work, and then from that can sort of just encourage more. Because I mean, even though we are kind of coming back into live space, I think there were a lot of awesome, brilliant projects that existed in our digital theater space, and creatively use this space as the only voice we did have, especially when we were super locked down, right? So I hope we do have more pieces inspired by these initial digital pieces to do more digital theater. Okay, so you mentioned Carly, and how the two of you have kind of been inseparable since High School Musical. So with the show that you did for Hamilton Fringe, it was actually under your theater company, Afterlife Theatre Co. So tell us more about that. Tell us more about the company that you've co-founded with Carly, and sort of the origin story with that as well.
Yeah. So for the longest, I guess for years now, Carly and I have basically constantly been like, oh, we should like formally make a space to make theater together, because we just we have like not just politically, but just even like dramatically, like really similar interests. We both like the same things. We both approach shows in similar ways. We have the same sets of questions about character, narrative, etc. Like, so for the longest time, we've kind of been like, we have to do this. And it was Carly who, during the pandemic, was like, it seems like the most absurd time to actually commit to doing this, but it also is like maybe the best time to do this, because we're like spending so much more time just indoors. Like, we can actually do some of the like maybe hard planning stuff that otherwise we would not be able to do. We could take advantage of the constraints in certain ways. Like, I love a constraint. I find constraints can be so generative. Like, like when you said, like, digital theater, like, obviously, I don't think anyone is like, I want theater to exclusively stay digital, right. But like, but I really appreciated the challenge of like, here's the clear limit, right? Like, the constraint is this is going to be digital. And now, so then what does that look like? How do you actually productively interface with that? And
it focuses our wild brains. Yes.
Exactly. And so, the pandemic felt like, a generative constraint. So we first started talking about like, what would our, we had a lot of conversations, like multiple hour long conversations, and many multiple hour long conversations about like, what would our mandate even be? Because, everyone has the same fucking mandate nowadays. It's all like, I want to do meaningful theater. It's like, okay, same, everyone. Yeah. And what would our name be that captures that? So we knew we knew from the get-go we wanted to do political theater, and political theater that interrogated like settler colonialism, racial capitalism, how they structure the world, and so that was like our broad kind of constellation of things. And then we were like, we need to arrive at a name. And so I think we came up with like 25 different names, and then we just asked a bunch of our friends for like a wholesale vote, basically. And Afterlife came up as the most voted thing. And the reason Afterlife was a kind of word we were thinking about was, speaking of academia, I had been reading, or rereading rather, a lot of Saidiya Hartman, who uses Afterlife as a way to think kind of the presence of slavery in our current world. And so Afterlife as a way of thinking about how structures of violence never end, they're like reanimated. And so that was like kind of percolating, and it's like, okay, that like speaks obviously structurally to what we wanted to, what we want to investigate, theatrically what we want to investigate. And then also, it just has kind of like, it like already addresses the question more broadly of time, right? Because like when you put Afterlife in, you're already going like, actually the central kind of temporal block we're thinking of is no longer in play. There's something that goes out of it.
Yep.
So from there, we were like, okay, Afterlife is the most voted one. It's really cool politically to think about. And then we built a mandate from there where it was like, okay, we're interested in questions of time, questions of violence, and how violence is carried through and repeated or reanimated through time. And yeah, finding ways to then intervene into those repetitions.
Right.
So, which I guess we still joke, like, this is still broad. Everyone's mandates are broad.
No, but I love it though. Like it does, it's making sense. Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, we're really, that's what all of our theater we want to do is organized around. We also kind of enjoy the dual valence of Afterlife, because we also really like the ideas of, we really like and have a lot of ideas for reviving pieces, but in really radically different ways. And that too is obviously a kind of like Afterlife.
Absolutely.
So there's lots of different ways we kind of want to enter into the question of time, social violence, how you intervene into it. But yeah, that's like kind of what we're thinking of, what we're working with. And to clarify, I guess, because I've spoken so much about just theater, obviously Carly is a musical theater actor as well. I'm obviously a musical theater actor. Our broad, like long-term goals are to really bring these questions to musical theater when we've built capacity in a different way.
Right.
But we also, we love, well, I don't really think of a distinction actually between theater and musical theater. They're both just kind of like, they're both just theater.
Yeah.
But we are interested in all different kinds of theater as a way to kind of explore these questions.
Right. Yeah, to speak to that, I also agree with you. I hope that the theater industry starts to sort of marry those two genres together, because I feel like quite often it's separate, right? Like you're a musical theater artist or you're an artist, and the artist umbrella catches everything. And going back to what you were saying about, the mandate, now that I'm talking about it, does sound broad, but no, I think quite not often enough is a company's mandate so interwoven with its name, and sort of like both of the origin stories go hand in hand. And I think like the way you just provided the name, provided your mandate, and gave sort of dramaturgical due diligence to both is like, yes, like I'm so excited to see what you and Carly have cooked up down the line. And and like you said too, of with, you know, working with constraints, but so like looking forward to seeing you all do stuff in person, if those constraints are sort of loosened, but knowing that if a constraint like the pandemic, or we're in some sort of digital lockdown again, just kind of going where you need to go, pivoting where you can, and art will be made regardless of its container. Love
and
that.
Actually, we definitely have because we of course went through a bunch of ideas for the Fringe Festival, and all of them were specific to like what specifically works for digital. So I feel like we're very prepped. If we get hard lockdown again, we'll just start going through the list.
Get out your digital clipboard and be like, okay, task 2 or idea 2. Let's put that in a Zoom room and get going.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. So this is kind of to double back on specifically with the show that you did, and then with future projects with you and Carly, because like I said, you co-wrote Two Arrested Cops of Killed Breonna Taylor, and you also performed in it. So do you think that will sort of continue going on in future productions, or do you think that was just sort of pertained to that particular show, because like you said, that was kind of like an idea that birthed from you from doing these dramaturgical reading or dramatic readings rather.
Yeah, so there's definitely my kind of immediate practical answer and long-term goals. So I think immediate practically, Carly and I will probably both be, just for reasons of capacity, always on both like the artistic production side of things and also the performing side of things. But we know long-term that's actually, we want to expand beyond that. So we hope that we're able to kind of like grow like a company of people basically where, you know, we could actually just house productions that, I mean, ideally we are no longer even involved in, that we just think are cool, right? Because there's so many different, I mean, Carly and I bring like very particular perspectives and positions to all of our theater, right? Like I'm a queer disabled white settler in grad school studying anti-Blackness and settler colonialism. Carly is like an Indigenous queer artist, and she who also is like very academically inclined and brings that in. But also there's obviously all kinds of stories that we are incapable of telling, but that absolutely fit our mandate and the things we want to see done. Actually, even just when we did Brunch, because that was really our target audience for Brunch was really non-Black people. It was about how non-Black people have stumbled through this pandemic. But one of our the actors that we brought in, who I actually know from like community organizing work, Rosie. Rosie was like, I want to do one of these that's actually just for Black people, but like about like how we need to be better. And Carly and I are both like, that's sick. Like if we had capacity, we would love to give you like make a space for you to be able to tell that story, because that's absolutely not a story either Carly or I could tell, but that's a story that needs to be told. That you do an amazing job at Rosie. So like long term, like that's exactly kind of our goal is to expand beyond just us doing things. But I think for the current moment, it will be a lot of Carly and I doing things.
Great. Love that. I again look forward to like expansion and the sort of, like you said, like just being specific, you and Carly, and like you said, you have your lists of things that the two of you can sort of start, but then as that ball gets rolling, creating a space, and your company sort of creating a space welcoming other voices and other story. I think that's so important. And I hope sort of as we kind of emerge back onto stage, as Canadian artists and even global artists, like we're kind of looking at post-pandemic, or still in a pandemic, but post the darker elements of the pandemic, kind of coming back into a space as a fresh start, or sort of, like a new playground, a different playground. And I hope more companies do that and kind of open up their season slots, or open up their sort of their space, their slots, their seasons to welcome those stories. And okay, great. So now that you've mapped out sort of your personal and artistic path, and then specifically let us know how that's going to sort of flush out with Afterlife Theatre. So going a little bit back into, you know, your passion to use art in a provocative means, or to sort of magnify and to analyze past political happenings and disparities, and sort of bringing them into today to rethink and work towards this sort of better future. Better is a very like open-ended term, but I think a lot of other artists kind of have that plan as well. And like you were saying, many other companies have the mandate of wanting to do purposeful theater to make change, or theater to help change. So with this lens in mind, I think you are someone I definitely want to ask this question to, because you are actively doing it now and will be committing yourself to do it. Where do you see the cultural landscape of theater in Canada going? It's a loaded question, but
Yeah.
I want to know your thoughts.
Yeah, it's so funny. Carly can be, so I'm an Aries and she's a Libra, and she's normally very diplomatic. But when I was talking to her about these questions, she was like, I would say maybe it'll be interesting. I was like, that's iconic, Carly. So I feel like I have to share Carly's response there because it's just so. But yeah, I think it can go in multiple directions. I think so. We definitely can't deny that we're seeing with the Stratford recasting and stuff. We're seeing a moment where like diversity in terms of like how it's the optics of it is being accounted for in a way that is unprecedented. But that does not necessarily actually mean a radical shift in the cultural landscape. It depends on how that goes, right? How that's harnessed, how that's taken. Like, obviously, there's so many, like, Christina Sharp talks about this a lot. She's a Black Studies academic. She's actually at York. She talks about how, like, basically she doesn't give a fuck about more Black representation if that means, like, more Black people playing cops on TV. Like, that actually fucking sucks. And I think that, you know, Canadians especially, Canadian identity is so, for some, so wrapped around this really kind of like basic multiculturalism where people really feel like they can like pat themselves on the back for just like being a part of diversity, which is such a kind of absurd response that in one sense I do fear that like, is that where we're going? Where it's just going to be like basically the same stories being told or the same politics underneath the stories being told, right? About like consolidating settler colonial violence, consolidating national violence, but just with like diverse TM faces. But also, you know, there's so many incredible artists, especially that are actually trying to challenge the kinds of stories that are being told, right? And that there does now seem to be like an opening for some of that work to happen, even in spaces where it might not have historically happened, like the Rez sisters at Stratford. And I don't think that's like a pat Stratford on the back for that, because like Stratford it's embarrassing that this is kind of like exciting for them to be doing this. Like it's far too long, and it still does not represent anything close to like their dominant kind of arts scene. But I think there's like a moment for actual like kind of a strategic entryway for a lot of artists who actually do have really important things to say, to be able to possibly like game the system. Because I definitely don't believe, you know, like I'm not so naive as to think that Mirvish or Shaw or Stratford are ever actually going to do radical theater, as much as I love going to see some of their shows sometimes, right? Because really the capacity is just unprecedented in Canada, right? So they're just able to do really cool things capacity-wise. But I do think that there's a chance for artists that are interested in making interesting things and interesting statements and being able to like flex this moment to say things that would not otherwise be said.
Right.
And so I'm kind of interested in following that, like who's able to, carve out a space that maybe was not what the space was intended for, because I absolutely believe mostly big producers just want like, they still just want their checks, right? They just want to make things that are palatable. But, you know, people can game that in a certain way. So I'm excited to see how people game that. Yeah,
and even to speak to that, like, you know, just using sort of Shaw Stratford as an example, or Shaw in this case, just recently spoke about seeing Master Harold and the Boys and an Octoroon, and those to me are for somewhere like Shaw were quite radical pieces for the sort of
Shaw
reputation that Shaw is. They were impactful pieces, and they are a lot of what we're talking about right now. But I think I feel like you would be on the same page with this too, of just like seeing consistency. Like I think a lot of companies, and I think now we're getting into the finance of things too, of like what's going to sell, what is our demographic, why is this our demographic? Like there's so many behind the doors conversations of just sort of like business sidey conversations. But right, I think like something I love that companies are doing those sort of pop-up provocative pieces. I'd rather that than them not do it at all.
Yes.
But I think like coming out of this sort of a consistency, so there is more of a common sort of trajectory of like, basically, throwing them in more often than not, and on a more sort of scheduled, purposeful, throwing them into the schedule as like the main pieces versus like doing it for the advertising or doing it as sort of like a token piece for the season. So consistency, I think, in standing behind, because if you are going to put those pieces on your stage, I don't think you can't just be the coat that you're wearing for that year and then you're just going to switch. It kind of has to be the article of clothing that is with you all the time.
Yes.
It's a very interesting analogy, but yes.
And also, like you said, like so many people in general, but I mean, especially if big companies actually want to change, which to be honest, they don't. But if they actually wanted to change, like rethinking the political economy of theater, like who are you imagining as your audience? And how is that forcing you to make certain choices? Like, why are you thinking that theater and art in general is like should follow like basically a customer service dynamic where it's about pleasing the audience, like because that's not what art is about. So already you're imagining an artist that matches a particular demographic, and then you're creating art that caters to their interests to make them happy. Like it's really to put on my academic hat, like the idea that art is a commodity to be sold is like unique. It's new to the 20th century. It emerges in like the 1920s, basically. Film opens up a new way of thinking about art that very rapidly becomes, this can be a commodifiable object. And it happened so rapidly that like that art then became treated as a commodifiable object. But I'm really like, I think we're seeing the negative effects of that in like even just a couple of years ago when Stratford staged like their feminist version of the Bacchae, which I thought was beautiful and great, but it was not in any way politically provocative, to be honest. It was just really fun and well done. But there were like some people walking out and like obviously old white men. And then people were talking about like that made the piece, like that negatively marked the piece. And I was like, where are we at that art is supposed to like just keep people in their seats and that's the marker of success? And like, where are we at that these particular people leaving is being marked as some kind of failure when like we could have a whole conversation with who's even in the room to begin with? Like, it's just, it's really, I would love to see a conversation about the political economy of the arts, like radically change, but that would take people having to recognize that art isn't meant to make money. Like, that's not the point of it anyway, which isn't to say it can't, but that when that's the goal, you're not doing it right.
Right. And I think there's so many variables that have been thrown, for lack of a better word, onto the stage today now and not to say they haven't been there, because like what I'm about to say is generations change and evolve, forever and have been. But I think right now specifically, the sort of stereotype of like white-haired white men. There's kind of like a shift of that happening, because I feel like our grandparents, like they're slowly their time is coming up. So like, we are segueing into the baby boomers sort of taking the place of the sort of white-haired individuals in our theaters. And that is a different generation that, lived through the 60s and the 70s. And they, like every generational discussion, they have different ideals and have learned differently from the generation prior to them. And then we have like our generation and even the generation behind us
Yeah.
that have even stronger and richer and different. And I mean, again, this conversation, we could be having this 20 years from now and it's the exact same sort of shift. But I think what's neat is, so there's that variable of a lot of these like bigger, especially bigger house season subscribers are no longer attending because they can't, or because they have unfortunately perished. But so there's that. And then
I really thought you were going to say past, and you fully went with perished, and I love that.
Well, yeah.
No, that was a great word choice.
But great. That's the word of the day.
Yeah.
But on top of that, I think, to address the unfortunate elephant in the room, like theater, quote unquote, because of our digital exponential growth and all things else, was becoming a dying art form. And not really, like, not the TikTok that people now, you know what I mean? Like the accessibility, and also because literally in the palm of our hand, we can watch a Netflix series, or we can watch a performance art that was on YouTube or something, right? But then enter the pandemic, where liveness was taken from us. Quite literally, we were boxed in a space where we had to go online. We had to turn to our phones and our screens. Yeah. And I think we're seeing now, as society opens back up, blossoms back up, people are itching for an element of liveness. They want that sort of night out. They want to go see something that is not just like series 17 that I've binge watched on Netflix.
Yeah.
And so I think another variable is now there's theater is quote unquote like alive again, or it's been the stage has been nourished, right? It's like so we have this again goes back to what we already chatted about. We have this sort of open door and gateway, I think, new and enriched playground space. And it's like, what do we do with that? Because we have the revolving audience sort of mix up happening, and then we also have this empty, freshly hasn't been used stage. And like that is just a whole big old idea clump there really wasn't necessarily a thesis statement to what I was saying, but it's just, there's what we do with the space and the sort of new atmosphere and environment that we're going to be given in a live sense is going to be, it's going to be the new cultural landscape of Canadian theater. So what are the pillars that we want with that? I think is
Also, listen, I would never tell this to my my students, but we're post thesis. You can trace a series of ideas, and absolutely, you're like tracing a series of like conditions that are like basically like obviously live theater is going to be like new again, and that's really exciting. And it's hard to and none of us can predict what that will end up looking like, but there's like an opportunity there. There's something to do with that. And hopefully it ends up working out, that it like really helps theater evolve in new ways. Absolutely. I too am like, I feel like for like the last 2 months, I just keep being like, I just want to be back on the stage. I think these like first shows, like, I don't know, it's going to be like electric.
It is. And I think it's like, it's just as humans, like we're looking forward to being in a space with other humans again. I mean, some of us, the pandemic was wonderful for them. But like someone like me, for example, I'm an extrovert. I love people. I build off of people's energy. So yes, being in creative spaces again, like with other creators. In the body, in the flesh, beyond, we all have underneath our torso. There's a body, but it's so. I was shocked because I just recently had an opportunity to sort of be in a room like that, and I was shocked how grounded, I felt, which was odd because I figured, this would be a different space to go back into, and I have to acclimatize myself back to it. Grounded, and the purpose behind like lines I was saying or scenes that were playing out was very different. It was loaded and packed with experience from the pandemic. Like, it was just like this unavoidable feeling that was there, and instead of it halting sort of my experience, I was using it kind of too. So talking about just kind of that, I think now that what I've just said is almost like, so it's still a landscape of theater, but it's the way that theater, it's the acting out of theater. So not only like our spaces and our companies are hopefully going to evolve, and there's going to definitely be an interest to see where that like tangible aspect of theater goes, but also as the person performing, that is going to shape theater differently too. Yes, because we all have there is a common ground of like, we've all been through a pandemic, right? We've all been through, and obviously there's varying degrees in how we were affected by it, but there was an even more element of transparency in the room and openness, and people admitting that, the schedule might be wonky, or it's going to be really interesting, me doing this choreography because I haven't moved my body in that way in a while. And there was just this open dialogue that prior to pandemic in those rooms, it was like there wasn't space for that, or people felt like, oh, like I can't vocalize my my discomfort right now. Yeah. But now people are like a little bit, and it's funny because it's a little bit like a hot mess, because everyone in the room, but we're all hot messes together, just like itching for the time to put something real, quote unquote, real time on stage. Yeah. And to me, it just got rid of all the like, pretentious cobwebs, unfortunately, we feel in rooms. This is what we do, Patrick. We go on tangents about everything and anything, and just,
Also, though, I have to say now, because I'm like, what you've said has actually, I have a concrete prediction now for the cultural landscape. It's a small concrete prediction, but we're going to see more physical acting. Mm-hmm. What you've just said has really made me think about it. I'm like, oh, yeah, definitely people are hungry for the body. They're hungry for the presence of the body. They're hungry for how the body can like be part of a story. We've lost that during the pandemic. It's a very small, but I bet we're going to see a rise in physical acting.
It almost like birth of the body.
Yeah.
I think our bodies need to be reborn. Yeah.
Which is someone who I consider myself a physical actor, so I'm ready for this.
Right.
Fuck method.
Wow. Well, there's, oh my goodness. Like I said, Patrick, get us in a Zoom room or in a thinking space, and we can just go on and on and on. There's so much to, and this is a theater space now too. So quite honestly, we are revitalizing the quote unquote stage, Canadian stage as we speak, which is so lovely. The layers. Okay, well, we have spoken about all of the things, got into recent past projects and future on the go directions and projects as well. So, Patrick, specifically, do you have any projects like on the go, upcoming? And this can be like academic as well, because that's, again, both sides of you are always working. And if so, where are they, and where can we keep up with you?
Yeah, so Carly and I are applying for a bunch of recommender grants right now, so thoughts and prayers for us as we go through those, but definitely don't want to jump the cart before the horse, or put the cart before the horse. But one of the things we will say is we've had a long conversation about Brunch. It was thought of as a digital piece, but Carly and I have kind of increasingly been curious about like the stageability of it in the live space. So we don't have any concrete details, but if hearing about Brunch interested you, definitely keep up with us, because we're trying to figure out a way to actually formally stage it, ask what that would look like, how that would work. We also have, and as I already said, we have the digital version, which is being put up. when we figure out the tech behind that. Other than that, I think it's all just like, we're definitely doing the next Hamilton Fringe, and we have a couple ideas, but we haven't selected one yet. And then yeah, I think that's kind of everything, because I don't want to, I don't want to say stuff before it's
right.
I don't want to attract the evil eye,
Right. So specifically, are there social media handles that folks should be following to grab all these projects and keep up with you too?
Yes. Afterlife Theatre is just the name of the company is on both Instagram and Twitter. I think also Facebook, but no one uses Facebook anymore. So like just Instagram and Twitter. And then also you could follow both me and Carly, because we obviously always share our content as well. Mine is at postmodernpat. I feel like saying it's just like a lulz handle. I'm not a postmodernist. It's I think a good handle. And then Carly's is Ms. Carly Billings.
Great.
So yeah, follow any of those accounts and you'll be able to be kept up with everything we're doing in the future. And I will say, I don't want to say like concrete things that are not established yet, but we have some really cool ideas that we're working out. So definitely
can confirm. I know you've dropped a couple ideas and hints to me, and yes, can confirm. Keep up for sure. And we will pop all of those social media handles below in our video description. Awesome. So as always, folks, you can follow my artist Instagram account at jillian.robinson96 to keep up with live and digitized things potentially. And then of course you can follow Cup of Hemlock Theatre on all of our socials, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you are watching this on our YouTube channel, be sure to like, share, subscribe, comment, all the things. And if you're watching this on one of our podcast platforms, be sure to subscribe as well.
That felt like the acting exercise where you do a different emphasis every time, like, and if you're watching this, and if you're watching this, and if you're watching this.
Alongside Jill figuring out her body again in theater, the articulators need to be massaged too. But yes, again, thank you so much, Patrick, for sharing the space with me today and sharing your ideas and your mind. And I'm, again, so look forward to seeing you on both the theoretical and the practical side of theater as we figure out life again, post-pandemic, during pandemic, all of the things. Thank you again for tuning in. And folks, be sure to stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you next time. Cheers.
Bye. Oh, true.